Hey guys, it's Adam from Premium Poker Tools, and in this video I want to talk about triple barreling against limpers on an ace XXXX board. So let me explain my thinking. So when people limp, they often don't have like the strong aces. Like they're probably not limping with ace king, ace queen, ace jack, even ace 10 a lot of the times. Some people won't even limp ace 9. Like these are all hands that they would choose to raise instead of limp. So on a board that becomes ace XXXX, they have a lot of top pairs on the river, but their top pairs are going to be with a weak kicker. So I'm kind of thinking to myself, maybe they're vulnerable to a triple barrel, where when we get to the river, we can fire a nice bet and get them off of these top pairs with weak kickers. And we don't have to worry so much about running into top pair with a stronger kicker. So that's kind of the inspiration behind this idea, and it's been something that I've always kind of wanted to investigate that I never took the time to do. But here I'm gonna go ahead and take the time to do it. So let's take a hand and run with it. So let's say we're playing 1-2. Our opponent limps from middle position. We ISO to $10 from the cutoff. It folds to villain, and he calls our raise. And we go heads up to the flop. Flop comes ace 8-6 rainbow. There's 23 in the pot. We cbet to 10. They call. Turn comes an offsuit 4. 43 in the pot. We bet to 20. They call. River is a 2. There's 83 in the pot now. They check to us, and we bet $60. So I'm kind of thinking to myself, when we get to this river spot, how is this going to be a profitable bluff? And in general, is this going to be a profitable line to take? So when we are on the flop, we're planning ahead, and we're thinking to ourselves, okay, I can generate a lot of folds by the river. I can get them to fold all their ace X hands. Do I want to take this triple barrel line? So that's kind of the bigger question is the line that we're going to take going to be a profitable one? So, one question to kind of take that further is, how often does this line need to work in order for it to be profitable for us? How often do they need to fold on the river, the turn, the flop, preflop, etc.? And really, we're going to kind of be more focused on the river. And then, okay, so we're mostly focused on how many folds are we going to generate on the river? Like, how many folds do we need to generate? Then the second question is, will they be folding enough? So let's look into the question of how many folds do we actually need to generate on the river. And we're going to assume that they continue pre-flop 75% of the time, flop 50%, and turn 75%. So let me kind of rephrase this. We're going to hold these kind of variables constant, and we're going to ask, when they play this way, how often do they need to fold the river for it to be worth it? And so I ran some math, and I'll give you the spoiler. It's around 50% if we assume these things. And, the math is kind of here. There's 5 outcomes that we're going to consider. They might fold pre-flop, they might fold the flop, the turn, the river, or they might call the river. And I go into kind of the extended math down here, and I'll post this in the video notes. But, I arrived at this number of 50%. So if they're calling the river bet more than 50% of the time, it's not going to work for us. But if they're calling it less than 50% of the time, then it will work for us. So that's kind of this first question, is how many folds do we need to generate on the river? And then for the second question, I kind of arrived at this idea that if they're folding all of their top pair hands, we have about 65% fold equity. So that's more than the 50% that we need. But if they call with some of their better top pair hands, it's going to be closer to 50. So it's going to be, more of a marginal, like break even kind of play. So let me kind of run through the numbers that I have here. So I'm gonna give my opponent this kind of limp calling range. And it's a little bit wide, but I mean, people who tend to limp also tends to want to see flops, so they're gonna probably make some mistakes and call with hands that they shouldn't. So this is kind of the range that I'm gonna assign them. I'm saying that they're gonna have open raised all of these stronger hands. So then the flop comes ace 8 6 rainbow, like I said, and we bet $10 into 23, and I'm going to assume that they continue with all of their pairs and better, and with their open-ended straight draws. So 50% of the time. Then when we go to the turn comes an offsuit 4, and I'm going to assume that when we bet the turn, they're going to continue with all of their top pairs and better. They're going to continue with their open-ended straight draws, but I'm going to say that they're going to fold out their weak pairs. So, pocket 7s, 5s, 3s, 2s, 7, 6, 6, 5. I'm going to assume that they fold those weaker things, and I'm also going to assume that they fold some second pairs as well. So at this point, the hand's kind of getting real. We ISO'd, we bet flop, we bet turn. At this point, I'm saying they're going to be giving some stuff up. And, these numbers are just rough. Maybe they call this and fold that, but we're just kind of thinking in terms of rough numbers for now. So this is what we have on the turn. Then the river comes an offsuit 2, or, a 2 of hearts. So now we're thinking to ourselves, okay, at this point, how many folds are we going to generate? So let's scroll down, and we can see that if they are, folding all of their top pairs, then they're only continuing 37.5% of the time, which means, and they need to be continuing 50%. So that, what is it, 12.5% difference, like that's our profit. So if we scroll down, we can see, we're getting 62.5% folds. So that's really good. But then we can play around and say, okay, what if they are going to call with like the top of their top pairs, like ace 10 off. So now our fold equity bumps down to 55%. If we throw in some ace 9 hands, now it's becoming, more of around 50%. And then we add some more ace 9s, and now it's not profitable anymore. So we kind of really need to be getting them to fold all of their top pair hands for this, to be comfortably profitable, sort of. But yeah, so hopefully running through these numbers gave you more of a sense of what I'm going for here. I'm assuming that they continue 50% on the flop. I think that's pretty standard. I don't think many people are floating with their King X kind of hands here. I think this is what most people who limp will continue with on the flop. Turn is pretty standard too. Maybe some people get sticky with the 8, but there's not that much variance in how people play this on the turn. But yeah, the real question is kind of the river, like how sticky do people get with their top pairs? So again, we need them to be folding 50% or more. And depending on how sticky they get with their top pairs, like sometimes they will be folding 50% or more. Okay, so that was kind of an initial analysis, but the analysis that we did here was a little bit overly simplified. So I want to talk about some caveats and some things that are good for us and some things that are bad for us. So in this analysis, we are assuming that we never make a hand. We're assuming that the only way for us to win the pot is to bluff and to get them to fold. But of course, in reality, like, we can make hands too. It's not like our opponent is the only one that can make hands. So, that's kind of a conservative assumption that was good for us, where we came up with this 50% number over here. In reality, that number probably drops down, because when we factor in the idea that we can make a hand, we probably don't need quite as many folds. And so another caveat that's good for us is the idea that sometimes they'll let us off the hook by raising early with their two pairs and their sets and their straights. So, when we're bluffing, if they raise us, we're going to be folding. So that kind of lets us off the hook. So someone who has pocket eights or, well, pocket sixes or fours or something, um, they are probably, sometimes they're going to be raising either the flop or the turn or something, or maybe they lead out on the river. So that kind of saves us money where we can say to ourselves, oh, okay, they're strong. Like, we don't need to waste money by bluffing them. And then on the other hand, it kind of lets us cap their range maybe on the river. So if we get to the river and we think to ourselves, if they had a straight, if they had three of a kind or two pair, they would have raised on the turn. So when we eliminate these hands from their turn calling range, and then we go to the river, it becomes much, much, much easier. Like, now their range is pretty much entirely, these top pairs that are weak. So that's great. When we can cap their range on the turn, when they call us and say to ourselves, when they call, they don't have sets or straights or a lot of two pairs. That helps us a lot, as you can see. So now, even if they do call with some of their top pair kind of hands, we still have a super profitable bluff because we were able to cap their range. So I think that's a very important caveat as well. So let's kind of go back to where we were. We were just by default making the conservative assumption that they never let us off the hook. And we go back down to here. Okay, so another caveat is the idea that this board, I think it filled up all of their kind of two pair possibilities where, if the board came ace king or ace queen or whatever, we wouldn't have to worry about that filling up a two pair for them because they don't have ace king and ace queen in their range. But ace 8 6 4 2, you can see here, 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 and here, it fills up all of these two pair hands for them. So, on this particular board, they're going to have more two pairs than they will on other boards. So this kind of board is kind of a little bit of a worst case scenario for us. So finally, another kind of caveat that's good for us is that on a board that would be more scary, we would generate more folds. So like if, let's say, a flush came in, that would scare them off a little bit and make them more comfortable folding, let's say, ace 10 or ace 9. So that's another thing to consider. And then, of course, there were some assumptions that we made that were not conservative. So, I mean, sometimes they'll bluff us, and we'll lose to a hand that, like, we could have bluffed later on. And sometimes people will limp ace-jack or, I don't know, ace-queen or something crazy like that. And against that kind of opponent, they'll have more strength, and they'll maybe call down more widely. I don't think too many people are limping ace-queen or even ace-jack, but, that's something to keep in mind is what's kind of the top of their limping range. Because the whole idea here is that when they limp, they cap their range. So you have to kind of think to yourself, how capped exactly is their range? So when you factor in all of these things, I mean, it would take a lot of math to really incorporate all of them. But my impression is that this 49, this 50% number is going to drop down. I think the assumptions that were good for us kind of are stronger than the ones that are bad for us. So, I mean, maybe we can drop this down to 40. Like, I'm kind of eyeballing that. 35. I don't really know. But that's kind of what my guess would be. How many, what this value truly is. So let's say that we dropped it down to 40. So now if we dropped it down to 40, then the bar is set lower. So we don't need to generate quite as many folds. So when we do that, even if they're calling with like ace 9 and ace 10, we still meet that criteria. So kind of all in all, I know this was kind of a lot to kind of handle in this video, but it seems to me that triple barreling against limpers on an ace XXXX board is usually going to be a pretty profitable play. There's caveats, it depends on what they're doing, but my impression is that in most cases it's going to be a pretty profitable play based on this analysis that I've done. Obviously, there's kind of more math we can do and we can get into things more finely, but I did want to release this video as kind of a preliminary sort of thing. In the future, I might make a tool that kind of helps you explore these kind of questions, like can we barrel against limpers and stuff like that, multi-street bluff sort of things. So hopefully in the future I'll have some sort of tool that allows us to go into more depth. But for now, I think this kind of preliminary video and analysis should be useful to you guys. So thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions or comments, definitely go down to the contact area and shoot me an email. I love to hear from you guys, and I don't claim to be perfect. There's definitely something that I could have missed in this analysis, so I want to hear from what you guys think about this sort of this sort of line. So yeah, again, thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.